We will now have our Dharma talk, and actually, today we're very fortunate. My brother from Lethbridge, Dr. Roland Ikuta, he will be giving our Dharma message today. Roland is my older brother, but last July, he received his Tokudo ordination. That's the first ordination to become a Jodo Shinshu priest. And he received it in Japan, in Kyoto, together with Jeff Haynes from Lethbridge also, and Tanis Moore from Manitoba. And with this Zoom service, what we've been doing is sort of sharing, or I've been having different people give Dharma talks, and about over a month now, I've been talking to my brother about if he could give a Dharma talk, and because of his occupation as a geriatrician in Lethbridge, he was really swamped at work with the COVID-19. But now that it's been a little bit of a reprieve, he said he'd be happy to share his Dharma message with us today. So I'm just gonna get my brother up here. So if you just bear with me a second here.
Grant, can you hear me?
Yeah, I got you.
Okay.
Thank you. And I'm going to spotlight him and then ask Roland to give the Dharma message in. Thank you.
Thanks, Grant Sensei, for this opportunity. Can everybody hear me okay? Yeah?
Yes.
Good. So I'm going to get people to put their hands together in Gassho, please. Join me in Gassho as I read the pledge. Our pledge. Breaking out of my shell, I shall carefully share a warm smile and speak gentle words just like the kind Buddha. Not becoming lost in my greed, anger, and ignorance, I shall be open-minded and act accordingly, just like the calm and peaceful Buddha. Not putting myself first, I shall share in the joy and sadness of others, just like the compassionate Buddha. Realizing the gift of life we have received, I shall live each day to its fullest, like the Buddha who continues to emancipate all. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Thanks, everybody. So today what I thought I would do is, even though Grant Sensei talked last week about the George Floyd situation and Black Lives Matter, I thought I would continue that theme. But in particular, I want to ask the question about whether or not we as Jodo Shinshu Buddhists should be more socially active. Should we be engaged? Should we be participating in some of these protests? Or more importantly, should we be doing more as Buddhists to help with those who are marginalized in our society, those who have prejudice against them? So just a disclaimer, I am a physician, but I am a fledgling in terms of Jodo Shinshu study. It's amazing to me that I could be in a Buddhist family all my life, raised as a Jodo Shinshu Buddhist. Both grandfathers were ministers. My father was a minister. My younger brother obviously is a minister. And yet it's amazing how little I know about Buddhism and Jodo Shinshu Buddhism. So you'll have to forgive me. And just to point out that these are mostly my personal views. So to start the talk, I'm going to actually ask people to do me a favor. And that is, most of you are actually hiding your video. And what I want to do, if you're able to, is I want you to make yourself visible on your video. So don't unmute yourself, stay muted. But I want to see if I can see people's faces. And the reason why I want to do that is because I want to ask you guys several questions through my talk. And so I'm going to ask you questions and ask you to show your hands by just raising your hands when I ask you the question. So if you're able to do so, and could you please or make your video visible? If you can't, don't worry about it. Um, yeah. Some of you may not have a camera, so some of you may not be able to do that, but we'll go by the majority. Great, so thanks for doing that, everybody. So the first question that I wanted to ask everybody, and again, show of hands, do most people, or do you believe that there is systemic racism in our society? When I talk about our society, I'm talking about our political system, our education system, our policing system, and also our healthcare system. So that I do know some about because I'm a physician. But if you believe that there is problems with systemic racism, can you please raise your hand? And I have to go screen by screen because there's 4 screens. So the first screen, the majority, there's 2 people who didn't raise their hand. Interesting. The second screen, if you could raise your hand, keep your hands raised. Again, almost everybody did. Some people have not. So looking roughly at the number of people who have raised their hands, I would say that 90% have raised their hands. So thank you for that. So the second question is a little bit more complex. So the second question is, do you believe that it is right for people to be out there protesting what has happened with Black Lives Matter? So it's complex because there's all this issue about COVID. So the COVID crisis, people are worried that by going out and protesting in large numbers, we're going to increase the number of infections. But do people fundamentally believe that it is the right thing to do to go out and protest? Is it the right thing to do to go out and protest despite COVID? So again, raise your hands if you believe that it is right for people to be protesting. Some people are doing thumbs up on their reaction, so that's great. So the first screen, can everybody just keep their hands up? Majority are saying yes. 3 people on the second screen say no, but everybody says yes. Third screen, sorry, keep your hands up, everybody. Okay, and then the last screen. Okay, so again, about 80% of the people who I could see had their hands up, so that they believe that this is something that we should be doing, or if it's a fundamental right to be able to do this. So then my next question for everybody is, how many people have actually gone out and joined a protest in the last 2 to 3 weeks? So how many people have physically gone out, despite the risks with COVID, and joined a protest rally or march? I think the majority of cities have actually had protest rallies. So if you have, can you raise your hand? So on the first screen, there's 1 person. On the second screen, there is 1 person, my daughter. On the third screen, there's no one. And on the fourth screen, there's no one in terms of people I can see. So that's very interesting. Of course, that's very complex because people are worried about COVID and the risk of COVID and all that. And some of the protests have turned quite violent, so there may be some worry about that as well. I know that Tanis Tanis is a fellow Tokudo person. Tanis is waving. Grant, can you, or Tanis, can you unmute yourself? Because I want Tanis to talk just a couple of sentences about what it was like to join the very large protest rally in Winnipeg. Tanis, go ahead.
Okay, well, they estimate there was 20 to 22,000 people attending, and our city is less than 800,000 people. And there's a big part of, aside from the Black population in Winnipeg, we have a population of 11% First Nations people, which is basically the largest in Canada. And so there was an interest from that side too. It was totally peaceful. I was really worried about social distancing, so I was way at the back and I really didn't hear any speeches. I clapped when people clapped, but that was about the extent of it. But I do know the speeches were basically saying that people need to take action, continue to take action, whether that's writing to their government or talking to their counselors, or however that, whatever form they see that in. They did suggest that people self-isolate for 2 weeks after. I've been going out shopping and wearing a mask wherever I go. So trying to keep solo. But yeah, it was very successful. And as I say, very peaceful. It went on and on and on and on. Aside from also, there were many cars driving around honking horns.
Tanis is an interesting situation because her condo or apartment is actually right across from the legislature ground. So thanks, Tanis, for that. So
You're welcome.
she said that she heard the protest continuing on past 10:30 that evening. Is that
That's
right?
it, yeah.
Yeah, great. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to share a screen, if that's okay. And I'm going to show you some pictures of another person who's Tokudo, fellow Tokudo person. Can people see my screen? Good. Okay, so on the next screen is some pictures. The tall fellow on the very far left of your screen is a fellow by the name of Todd Sujia. Todd went through Tokudo with me. He's a retired dentist, actually, and he lives in Minneapolis. So he's an assistant minister in Minneapolis. And he's quite involved in the interfaith community. Particularly, there's an interfaith group of Buddhists, various sects of Buddhism, that meet, and they decided as a group that they needed to go out to a protest rally. So this is their picture of the Buddhist ministers, various, not just Jodo Shinshu, but various other ministers. Of course, Minneapolis is where George Floyd died. And so this is the spontaneous memorial they gathered at for George Floyd, one of the protest rallies. And then this is the spot where he was unfortunately killed. And again, the spontaneous memorial that's there. And this is him, his picture of the group. So estimates were there was over 15,000 people at that rally, a very large rally. These are happening daily in Minneapolis. He tells us very, very many stories about some of the concerns, but also some of the positive things that are coming out of these rallies. Okay, so that's it. So I'm going to stop sharing. So he clearly was at a rally. In fact, he actually helped organize the Buddhist response to the rally. So I really commend him for doing that. So again, I'm going to go back to the group view. And the next question I want to ask people is how many people believe that as Jodo Shinshu Buddhists, or Buddhists in general, that we are, for the most part, not racist, that there is not a problem with systemic racism or problems with discrimination amongst our group or with the Jodo Shinshu followers. So if you believe that Jodo Shinshu Buddhists are, for the most part, pretty good, not racist, that we do not harbor systemic racism, can you please put up your hand? So if you believe that we are not racist, put up your hand. So it's about 60% in the first page. So again, keep your hands up if you believe that we are not racist. And about 50% in that one. So the third screen, about 50%, a little less than 50%. And the last screen, okay, the majority actually in the last screen said we are. So I want to point out just a couple of things that I think that it is really, really important for us to reflect ourselves about our own views and our own racism. So I'm just going to point out a couple of things. If people have not read the larger sutra and the 48 vows from Bodhisattva Dharmakara, I would urge you to actually read the 35th vow and the 41st vow. Now do so, but then talk to your minister about it. So the 48 vows, of course, from Dharmakara are the 48 vows espousing, and we believe in the 18th vow being the primal vow. But the 35th vow specifically talks about women in Buddhism and talks about the fact that women will not be born into the Pure Land, or they will have to be reborn as males first. And not only that, most of the interpretations read that the 35th vow says that women will need to denounce their womanhood in order to be born into the Pure Land. So that's the 35th vow. Now, of course, there's various interpretations of the 35th vow, and I think some of the better interpretations talk about that there maybe is no gender in the Pure Land, but you should read the 35th vow. The 41st vow is very similarly talking about people with disabilities. So it talks about the fact that people with disabilities will not be born into the Pure Land. Okay, so again, some people have interpreted the 41st vow as being discriminatory. More recent information about Jodo Shinshu Buddhists, people should read the treatment of the Burakumin, which is the untouchable segment in Japan, and how the Jodo Shinshu, particularly Honganji organizations, both Nishi and Higaji Honganji, have actually had pretty systematized discrimination against the untouchable family or groups in Japan. And it's really just in the last 20 years or so that there has been attempts to reconcile these discriminations. So there has been actually evidence of more systemic racism or social injustice, even with the Jodo Shinshu sect. So it's important for us to recognize that we are not without guilt. I'm just going to talk very briefly about a family that I know of, to bring it to more contemporary times. So as people know, the Buddhist Temple Southern Alberta is an amalgamated temple of 6 different temples. And when we amalgamated 10 years ago, there was about 10% of the population from other temples, the amalgamated temples, that did not join. So one of the things that we did was we went and asked those people, well, why didn't you join the temple? And one of the responses I got, and I'm going to try and change the information a little bit so that these people cannot be identified, but one of the member temples, this person was very involved in the temple, lots of volunteer work, very involved, very dedicated. And that person said that they decided not to join because of the discrimination against them. So 15 years ago, they attempted to be more actively involved by trying to take a bit more of a leadership role, by perhaps even joining a board. And they were told by 2 people very specifically that they should not do that because they came from a Burakumin family. That they actually came from a family historically of the untouchables, and those kinds of people should not be on the board or in a leadership role. And that was 15 years ago. And that was a Jodo Shinshu temple. Okay. So again, I think it's really important for us to recognize that we are not without fault. But fundamentally, I do believe that Buddhism in general and Jodo Shinshu Buddhism in particular the principles are not discriminatory. That Shakyamuni Buddha, Amida Buddha, Shinran have said clearly that enlightenment is for all sentient beings, that there should not be discrimination based on gender, based on race, based on education, based on class level. I wanted to read very briefly a statement from the Buddhist Churches of America from the Ministerial Association. This was written by Reverend Harry Bridge, who happened to be one of my professors this term. And he writes in part, Amida Buddha is said to have wisdom of non-discrimination. This is manifest in the great compassion that embraces all beings. Amida Buddha does not reject anyone based on age, gender, class, race, or any other basis. although it is difficult for us as unenlightened beings to manifest this wisdom of non-discrimination, this radical equality is an ideal in our tradition. Although it is difficult for us as foolish beings to manifest all embracing great compassion, this kindness and caring is our model to strive for. However, this equality will never be reached until Black Lives Matter. Buddhists are not immune from racism. The insidious influence of racism is learned from many sources, usually unconscious. It is important for us as Jodo Shinshu Buddhists to emerge in self-reflection and to open to finding the racism within ourselves as well as within our temples and Sangha. With the Buddha Dharma as our guide, let us help with the work to dismantle systemic and institutionalized racism both within ourselves, our organizations, and in the community around us. I thought that was particularly well written by Bridge Sensei. So fundamentally, in the end, I believe that Jodo Shinshu Buddhism really reflects or tries to teach us about three things. One is self-reflection, that we need to look at ourselves first and foremost. We need to understand our own biases, and by doing so, we become more humble and we're able to be more, have more humility. The second principle I think that is critical in Buddhism, Jodo Shinshu, is gratefulness or gratitude. Gratitude for the primal vow in Amida Buddha, but gratitude also for the causes and conditions that allow us to live our life as we currently live. And the third component is compassion. So obviously I'm talking about the compassion of Amida Buddha towards us, but I also think that it's critically important for us to have compassion to others. Even though our efforts may be faulty because of our Bombu nature, I do think that we need to make a stand, be more active in terms of trying to help others. So when I talked about the first question, which is, do we believe that we should be more active? If I look at things myself, I believe that yes, I do need to be more self-reflective. And yes, I do believe myself that I should try to do more. I'm going to share the screen one more time. And let me just see. Can everybody see my screen? So I do have a couple of reading resources for people. If people want to read a very short article, there's 10 Steps to Non-Optical Allyship, written by Muriel C. Harper. She's an assistant writer or editor of Square Peg Books. She wrote a really good Instagram article on how to be allies for the Black Lives Matter movement. Not just to put up a Facebook page saying Black Lives Matter, or not just even to go to protest march, but what we can do to be true allies. Another book that I have not read fully, I've started to read it, but have heard from this gentleman on numerous occasions, is by Ibram X. Kendi. Ibram X. Kendi is a professor of African American Studies. He received his PhD from Temple University in the United States. He's a professor of African American Studies at the America University, which is in Washington, D.C. It's a private university, but he is now the head of the Boston University Anti-Racist Research Group. And so his book is How to Be an Anti-Racist. It's really well written as well. If you want to read something that's a little bit more hopeful, this is a really good book. Thanks to my wife Brenda for pointing it out to me. It's called Humankind. It talks about racism, but it talks about the fact that fundamentally Rutger Bregman believes that people are actually kind, that people do not want to be racist. That if you look at history about what has happened with major disasters in the past, like Katrina, If you look at 90% of the actions that were taken during these various difficult times, including COVID, they have been very altruistic and very thoughtful and helpful and kind towards other human beings. The next book I'm going to show you, but it's out of print, so it's really hard to get copies of this. It's called Engaged Pureland Buddhism. It's actually a series of essays. I believe it was actually written when Professor Alfred Bloom passed away. And it has a collection of essays about how to be more active as Jodo Shinshu Buddhists. Really good book. There is copies in our library at the BTSA, and I know Grant has a copy, so if you really want to read it, borrow it from Grant if you're in Vancouver or Steveston. And then the last book is one of my favorite. It's called Engaged Spiritual Life by Donald Rothberg. Just a warning, it's not specific to Jodo Shinshu Buddhism. It is general Buddhism, but it talks about how we can practice or participate in helping ourselves towards a more spiritual life, but then incorporate social ideas as well, how to help others. So those are just some reading resources for people, and I will unshare. So I'm going to end my talk with a quote. I tried to find the exact where this quote came from. It was actually written in a Tricycle magazine article by Duncan Williams. I think several people have actually heard Duncan talk. So he gave this speech at Fort Sills, which some of you may know was a internment camp in the US for Japanese Americans. And it is also where the Trump administration decided that they were going to house a whole bunch of immigrants and separate the children of those, illegal immigrants there. And so he was at a protest rally there, and this is his quote. "It is said that the Buddha, after emerging from his awakening under the Bodhi tree, distinguished himself from other enlightened beings by not dwelling in quiescence, demonstrating his unsurpassed and complete awakening by speaking up." So if I can have everybody join me in Gasho again. Thank you for listening to me. Namo Amida Butsu, Namo Amida Butsu, Namo Amida Butsu. And thanks, Grant Sensei, for giving me this opportunity. Sorry I went a little long.
Thank you, Roland, for that. You know, it's funny. He's always been my bigger brother, but in the realm of being a Buddhist minister, I have 30 years experience over him. But anyways, I wanted to share with you one thing that my brother mentioned, and it's a poem by a Buddhist poet by the name of Mitsuo Aida. And he became very popular in Japan. This is more of a modern day poet. He's passed away now, but Roy Sensei, could I ask you to just turn down the volume of the, I'm getting an echo, so could I ask you to turn down the volume? So in Japanese, this poem is called Ano Hito. Ano hito ga yukun ja, watashi wa yukanai. Ano hito ga yukanai, yuku nara, watashi mo yuku. Ano hito, watashi wa docchi no ano hito ka. So I translated this into English to my best of my ability, and it comes out as this: so and so. Because so and so is going, I don't think I will go. Because so and so is going, I think I will also go. So and so, which so and so am I? So I hope I'll just leave that with you, and I will send this out to the mailing list for people. If you are not on the mailing list and you want it, you could contact me, but I'll send this out. I think it's a wonderful poem that reminds us of our own discrimination that we have within us as well. So one more time. Because so-and-so is going, I don't think I will go. Because so-and-so is going, I think I will also go. So-and-so, so-and-so, which so-and-so am I? So with that, I would like to close today's service, and we'll just close with the recitation of the name of the Buddha. Please join me in Gassho. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu.